Hi everyone, I'm Tal Zafani, the CEO of the Ayn Rand Institute. We're here in a beautiful park in Atherton, California, in the heart of Silicon Valley, and I'm joined by Brian Amerige, a fellow objectivist and a former product manager at Facebook. And so welcome. Hey,
thanks.
How are you doing?
I'm doing all right, actually. It's been an interesting couple weeks.
I bet.
But yeah, I'm doing well, and I'm excited about what's ahead.
I wanted to start kind of our conversation, maybe a little bit in the background of just where do you come from, and maybe a little bit about how did you encounter Ayn Rand and objectivism?
Yeah. So I mean, I grew up in New York. I did not grow up here, unfortunately. I grew up in New York. I think that the earliest memories I really have that are interesting are, I started a small business while I was in high school.
Oh wow!
And I started it thinking, out of this realization that I learned more when I was homesick than when I went to school. And I kind of had this moment where I realized that, the people around me didn't necessarily know tons more about life and like what people ought to spend their time on and what was right and what was wrong than I did, even though I was a kid.
Wow. So really philosophical questions in your mind, or what?
I mean, it started with religion for me.
Okay.
I became an atheist, I guess, when I was about 13 years old, and that was sort of, very few people around me on Long Island in New York were atheists, and so that sort of started this domino effect of me sort of questioning, like, well, what else do people think that isn't necessarily true? What else should I really be rethinking? And it kind of led to everything. So that, and then combining that with this sort of, trying to start this business while I'm in high school, which was really hard to do. I had lots of people telling me, like, you're throwing away your academic career, you're not going to get into Stanford, like, you can't do both of these things at the same time. I had teachers telling me, this is a waste of your time, this computer stuff. Like, it's not.
What was the business about? Was it software?
It was software. Yeah. I mean, I was scratching my own itch. That's what it was. I had, as a kid, I started building like web pages, and I didn't like the tools that were available to build web pages on the Mac, and so I was like, I'll build my own. I'll build something that actually, fits the needs for what I'm doing. And I tried to turn that into a business because I wanted to be able to follow my own curiosity, but be financially independent. So support myself in deciding what I wanted to spend my time and attention learning.
Did you make any money, or?
Yeah, no, it was profitable. I mean, it did pretty well. I mean, I won't go into actual numbers, but it did pretty well. It almost put me through college.
Awesome, that's amazing. There's like we're talking about like 16, 17, 18, or?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, around that time. Yeah.
That's great.
So, I mean, that was the very early beginning. But then, that intersection of realizing people don't know as much about, religion and philosophy as maybe it seems like they do, even as adults, and this focus on entrepreneurialism and building products, and that sort of view of the world of, you can, as Steve Jobs used to say, like, you can poke life and something comes out the other side. Like, you can build your own things that other people are going to use. That mindset to me sort of led to this really strong sense of independence. And eventually one of my aunts sort of just said, like, hey, Brian, you're smart. Like, smart people read Atlas Shrugged. Here, try this book.
An aunt.
An aunt.
Yeah. Okay.
And I picked it up, and it was just this sort of moment of like, whoa, there's an entire integrated philosophy behind this idea of entrepreneurialism, this moral defense of the entrepreneur and the industry titan. And there's this entire integrated, codified way of thinking about individualism, and sort of, obviously the full stack of philosophy was there. And it's sort of, I was voracious after that. I read everything.
So I'm curious, because kind of my experience, how soon did you figure out that Atlas has something beneath it, or that is the core philosophy? Did you realize it right away, or like, wow, this is really a great novel?
No, I realized it right away.
Okay.
I mean, it was right away. In fact, the way I thought about it wasn't even about the novel. It was actually about Rand. I realized, like, well, wait, somebody wrote this. And in order to write this, like, you really had to understand all of these ideas. And, obviously, as it turns out, she understood many more ideas than I did as a kid. But it just opened my whole world up to objectivism. And so I carried that, I started with the fiction and then moved to the nonfiction, and I read the nonfiction through college. I continued sort of operating this business in college, did a little bit of work with Apple, sort of like while I was in college. Ended up, leaving, dropping out of school.
Dropping?
Dropping out of school to, yeah.
You did what you had to do, you know.
Been one of those Silicon Valley dropouts,
Exactly.
I guess. But I left actually to, for the first time, dedicate my focus to my business. And I had never done it. I was splitting my time in high school with things. I was splitting my time in college. Same business, and I got to a point where I felt like I wasn't learning very much in college because I had taught myself a lot of software engineering in high school. Yeah. But I had the confidence at that point to say, I'm really going to bet on myself. I'm going to give myself, and I thought of it as a leave of absence. I think officially I'm still on a leave of absence from college, still technically, but I thought of it as a leave of absence and a bet on myself to I'll give myself one semester to see where I can go with this, to actually turn these ideas into what I had always hoped these products would be, and it worked. It was a marvelous period of time where I had complete freedom and I really felt like an entrepreneur, and I was able to build the products into something I was excited about. And that's eventually what led me to Facebook, actually, because I got to a point where, with the products that I had started in high school, where I realized I'm happy with these. So what's next? And the next ideas I had were much more ambitious. They were, not just sort of tools for the Mac. They were much more ambitious, sort of social problems. Because I was at that time, I had become much more philosophical, much more aware of what was happening and not happening in the world. Bigger ideas. And so, Facebook really entered the picture for me because I started to have this view of history, in a sense, of, I started to look at, the most important historical developments of technology have been communication tools. They've been tools that, I think Chris Cox, who's the head of product at Facebook, said, they accelerate the velocity at which information and ideas can move around the world. And Facebook was sort of another discontinuity in that regard. And so for me, it was that recognizing that was the sort of most important kind of technology for changing changing history, and which is to say changing the future. But also looking at it from an objectivist perspective, saying what's going to most help these ideas get out in the world.
What about Google, by the way? Isn't Google a better candidate than Facebook from that perspective?
In terms of information, but maybe not ideas. And I think there's an interesting distinction there between Facebook and Google. And the essential difference between Facebook and Google, as I've always seen it, is that the atomic unit of the world from Facebook's perspective is people, and the ideas that they have, and the experiences that they have. The atomic unit of the world from Google's perspective is information. And it's sort of disconnected from, exactly. And it's sort of disconnected from the person itself. It's just disconnected from the communicator. And so, that's why I joined Facebook in the first place, was this sort of intersection of this is an incredibly important, communication technology that discontinuously changes the velocity of ideas moving around the world, but also that this was a platform that people with, no money, no power, no connection to the press, could give a platform for their ideas, could get their ideas out in the world. And from my perspective, on a personal level, that was objectivism for me. I was hoping I'm going to help build the platform that when somebody figures out how to talk about these ideas in the right way, that these are ideas that are going to go flourish out in the world. Wow. So that's why I joined in the first place, was the sort of intersection of those two things.
So what did you find as you joined Facebook? What kind of culture, company did you find there?
Facebook is an amazing place. It continues to be. The culture at Facebook is incredibly unique. I wasn't sure how long I would last at Facebook, because I was this really entrepreneurial person that was I didn't want, my whole premise in the beginning of my career had been, I don't want anybody telling me where to direct my attention. I want to be able to follow my own curiosity. And I was wondering, is Facebook going to be a good place for people like me? And it turns out it was wonderful. And the first thing that I ended up, the project I helped start at Facebook was a project called Paper, which was a complete rewrite of the Facebook application, redesigned from the ground up for a multi-touch interface on a phone. And the way that they sort of structured that project was almost like a startup inside the company. It was a very well-funded startup.
How many people are we talking about?
It started with probably about 5 of us, and it eventually grew to about 13 of us. And that was really I worked with
Go do it.
Go do it. You have 2 years of runway. You have all of Facebook's resources, and you have the scope to go build something that's going to potentially replace the main Facebook application. And so I stayed. And I didn't know how long I was going to be there, but eventually I was there for just almost 7 years.
And I guess there's so much risk associated with trying out things in the Facebook realm, right? In just you make a wrong turn and
I mean, it's uncharted territory. Everything that Facebook is doing, like the scale it operates, the kind of problems they're working on, the company has always tried its best to sort of, figure out how to navigate that. And, I think a lot of where this sort of iteration culture comes from is that because, we don't quite know, what we're dealing with in terms of social problems and how you're actually going to scale these things. And so you kind of have to try things and see what works and see what doesn't work and iterate from there. And that works for some things and doesn't work for others.
And I know it's very data, they call it data driven. I more like kind of the term data informed, but I remember seeing kind of marketing videos about Facebook. Everything is about measuring. Did you find that kind of interesting?
I mean, it was challenging. I'll say that. I think my role in the company as someone who's, I'd say, like cut more from Apple's cloth in terms of like thinking about product development, and the whole paper team was sort of cut from that cloth. We were kind of the counterbalance to that sort of very measurement-heavy, very quantitative culture.
Creative, more.
Yeah, I mean, we were willing to trust ourselves a little bit more. We thought a little bit more in terms of the long term than in sort of necessarily things that were measurable in A/B tests.
So fast forward to the point where you started feeling there's a problem and you put out a memo. We have a problem with political diversity.
Yeah.
What prompted you to write that memo?
Well, what ended up happening is, Facebook in a lot of ways, because of the role it plays in the world, is sort of like a mirror, like the culture is a mirror image of what's going on in the world. Like we have to deal with, we are always dealing with the sort of social and political issues that are happening out in the world because that's what the platform is being used for.
We all argue on Facebook, yeah?
That's right. And so, the same thing happened inside the company's culture. So around, the 2016 election, those political issues just sort of started coming more and more into the internal culture. And part of Facebook's culture is this, this idea of like bring your authentic self to work. And, increasingly when people become more political, that means you're bringing more politics to work.
So there were like political issues or debates and.
Oh, I mean, there were Barack Obama posters up on the wall. The people tried to put, Trump posters up on the wall. That didn't work out so well for those people. There were a lot of conversations, I think, internally in the company about, what are we doing about this issue or that issue? Because Facebook's role in the world is it can be kind of fuzzy in that sense of like, are we sort of a social utility that should be working explicitly on issues, or are we a platform that should be as transparent as possible and just carrying people's ideas? And I have a particular perspective on that. I'm much more in the latter camp.
Right.
But what I actually in particular started to see, like over the last year or so, was that these conversations weren't just sort of they weren't sort of all on equal terms. There were some people who felt very free to share their opinions inside the company, and they got a lot of respect, and people listened to them. But there were other people who were being either shut down, or their character was being attacked. They were being called racist or sexist or transphobes, and like all the sort of ists and obes. And people started getting attacked for sharing ideas that are, in fact, not racist, not sexist, and so on. And the result of this over time, like it didn't take very long for people to realize, like, oh, that sort of non-left-leaning perspective isn't welcome here. And people just stopped sharing it.
What do you think is different from any other company where you have diversity of people argue? I've argued with a lot of co-employees and colleagues over lunches that we had together. What's different about that in Facebook?
I think one of the things that's different is that we kind of run the company on Facebook, right? And so we have a lot of conversation that isn't in person. That's actually happening. We have a product called Workplace, which is basically like a version of Facebook for running a business. And there's a lot that's really wonderful about that. You get exposure to many different parts of the business that you wouldn't get exposure to. You have a lot more transparency about what's going on. There's a lot of Facebook scale that's only been possible because we've done that. But one of the downsides to it, though, is that you kind of have this internal Facebook version of
invites more
Facebook
discussion.
Well, I mean, it's not face to face anymore. You're almost, and in a company where you've got 30,000 employees, you're almost anonymous at that point. Like you don't really know who your colleagues are. They're almost like anonymous people on the internet. And so, what ended up happening though was that people start sharing these positions, and then they get attacked for it. And then nothing happens. They just sort of, the mob forms, people agree with the people who are attacking them, and then that's the end of it. And so it's a real, and again, it's a scale problem of obviously a lot of this stuff is already against harassment policies and things like that inside any company.
You were part of that harassment, as far as you felt that personally, or you didn't engage with those kind of discussions?
I mean, I didn't engage with people who were trying to attack me, but it definitely was happening, and HR, I think, tried to do something about some of it because it became pretty visible publicly. But this culture of having people silenced because they don't want to be attacked, because they don't want to lose career opportunities, because they don't want to be ostracized. And so there was a lot of self-censorship, exactly, inside the company as a result of that. And I was in a position where, number one, if you think back to why I came to the company in the first place, if Facebook is increasingly becoming a company where you can't have these conversations, where certain ideas are just sort of off the table, where not all perspectives are something that are actually, you can't actually discuss all perspectives, I increasingly didn't want to be at the company. Just not useful as far as the reason I came to the company. And so that, combined with the fact that I had been there for a while, I had some degree of financial independence, and I had some degree of seniority in the company. People know me from the work I've done. I was in a position where I could basically speak out against it. To me, it was almost like a no-risk kind of thing. If I speak out against this and I get fired because of it, I don't want to be at the company. Right. So that's fine. That's a difficult thing to go through.
That was kind of their kind of mental framework where you decided to actually act and write the memo, or?
Yeah. I mean, that was. I recognized that a lot of people were feeling this way, and I had written a few other things in the past, and I got a lot of messages from people privately that said "Thank you for writing this. I completely agree with you, but I could never say it publicly. I would never. You're the only one who knows." I got hundreds of messages to that effect about different things that I had said inside the company. And so I just needed to raise the issue, basically. I was in a position where I could.
So I want to talk about the moment where you decided to write the memo. So what went through your mind as far as, is it going to be leaked? What am I trying to actually achieve? What would happen if I write this? Because it's a big step forward, and I think, about what happened in Google, and you had that in the back of your mind, or what was kind of the premise?
When you're at a company like Facebook that's always sort of at this intersection of everything that's in the news all the time, you're always kind of aware that everything you do can leak. And the fact that we kind of run the company on this internal version of Facebook makes it even more likely, because it's not, most of these conversations, or a lot of them, they're not happening in closed door meetings. They're happening sort of on workplace. And so you're always kind of aware that could happen. But my own principle on this has been that you can't not have an important conversation because you're afraid of it leaking. And the cost of something leaking is absolutely lower than the cost of avoiding important conversations inside a company. Because when you're at the point when you avoid a conversation that needs to be had inside a company, you've already lost.
But you can go into a room with a couple of executives and have that room in closed doors and avoid the PR, nightmare.
You could, but that, a lot of the purpose of that memo was to be very public about it inside the company. Inside the company, it was to be very public about it, because I had to show people that you can say these things and you're not going to be fired, you're not going to get shut down. It's okay. It's, and not only that, but you have to give visibility to it. Hey, you don't see all the other people, but there are lots of people that think this way.
Oh, so it was obvious to you they won't harm you, or nobody would go after you as far as
well,
you fired?
Was it obvious to me? I had a pretty good sense that they wouldn't. From working there for a long time, knowing the way HR works, knowing the way the executives thought about these issues, I had a pretty good sense that they wouldn't. But it was a risk. If they did, then I would be proven wrong, and then I would fail in my effort. Right. And if I wasn't fired, then it would actually demonstrate what I wanted to demonstrate.
So what happened? You wrote the memo. Yeah. What's the first thing that happened?
So the memo was sort of accompanied by these posters that I put up too, with some of these quotes from the. I just mentioned that lots of people messaged me, saying I agree with you, but I'm afraid to speak publicly, and so on and so on. So I made all these posters that sort of had these quotes from these messages, and that was sort of the marketing for the group in itself, because otherwise the group would have just been kind of an obscure thing inside the company. And so it got a fair bit of attention inside the company before it leaked. Over that week before it had leaked, We got the group grew a significant amount
So
already.
people were inviting other people to read this? And
Yep. Yeah. I mean, it was sort of growing like at a sort of steady pace inside the company. There wasn't any sort of, it didn't reach a point where there was any sort of like, senior leadership reaction to it, or I didn't expect that at that point yet, because it was sort of a slow growth kind of thing. But then the leak happened, and then it just sort of grew exponentially. Massive amount of attention on it, both internally, obviously externally, and then that did, for better or worse, accelerate the degree of senior leadership attention, like on the issue, and
I guess that escalated the whole idea. What happened again next? What did you get, like executives, engaging with you, or?
Oh yeah, I mean they took it really seriously. I not only was it sort of an active conversation. Facebook has these little weekly Q&As with Mark Zuckerberg and the management team, like the
Weekly, every week. Wow.
On Fridays, and so this was like one of the major topics that came up during that conversation. But I also started meeting with some very senior executives at the company to talk about the issues. They wanted to hear my perspective. They wanted to actually understand all the constituent pieces of what's going on. And they didn't just sort of listen to that stuff. They actually started working with me on how to fix some of the issues. And so, I spent a fair number of hours working on recommendations for how we ought to change the internal culture to be more accommodating of.
So they were not panicking, oh my God, what's going to happen now, and trying to be overprotective? Or?
No, there wasn't a panic. They took it seriously. They started moving, in very Facebook, fashion. They basically recognized that, there is an issue here. There's a problem. We need to fix it. How do we fix it? Please help with that.
Yeah. That's interesting. I'm just assuming how hard it is for an executive to be in that situation and keep it.
Yeah. I mean, I have a lot of sympathy for the executives at Facebook and the position that they're in. They're part of the battle here is that you've got these almost like warring factions of employees, and there's no winning when that happens. Like picking a side is not a winning move for a company like Facebook, which is a lot of what my worry is.
Yeah. Again, it says a lot about the strong culture of a company that they acted this way. I can imagine 100 different ways where executives will panic and just try to be very protective and isolate the problem and shut it down. Yeah. And you see what happened in Google. I think that was. But I'm interested in the term that you kind of put there, which is a monoculture, and it's pretty harsh, statement to say it's a monoculture. Don't you think it's more like it's maybe a vocal majority and a minority, or maybe a vocal minority? I don't know, because in every organization you have the same problem of people being very vocal, and some of them even, very adamant to make themselves heard in a way that can make people kind of shut down. But why did you choose to call them monoculture?
Well, because I think in effect it was. If you look at the way they were making sort of policy decisions and the way sort of different political perspectives were influencing product direction and product roadmap, just to talk specifically, you look at like content policy, for example, that in that sense that really was almost monocultural, like in the degree to which they're hearing different perspectives.
What do you think about the relationship of Washington and Facebook? How do you think, is it effectively managed by Facebook, or? No.
I mean, I don't think it is, insofar as they are that policy of appeasement and sort of accepting the inevitability of regulation. Offering to help write the regulation. That's stuff that I have really strong thoughts on being not healthy. But one of the things that did get lost in this distinction between me writing this memo internally for Facebook and the way it's been talked about externally is that, on one hand, I thought this was a hugely important strategic issue for the company to talk about internally.
Right.
And I was very vocal in saying, I think we're heading in the wrong direction here, and we need to fix this. And this is, our mission is at risk because of this. On the other hand, particularly now that I'm on the outside of Facebook, I would defend the company's ability to sort of screw that up till the very end. You know, the idea that people are concerned about Facebook censoring voices, and so the solution is for the government with guns to come in and censor Facebook. You know, it doesn't work. It's not going to work. It's going to make things worse. You know, government is not going to be able to figure out where that line is any better than Facebook is. Not to mention, it's just immoral at its very core. Of Facebook is a private company, and the platform that they built is their property. And you know, a government or the public's, you know, has no right to sort of tell them how to operate it. And so, you know, for me as an employee, like, my right was to leave, and I did. And I think now as a user on the public side, you know, my right is to find an alternate platform or build an alternate platform, or give that feedback and sort of, you know, hold my breath and see where it goes.
But you saw from inside of Facebook this willingness to engage with government or have government give guidance.
Yeah, you know, they've been very, very open to working with Washington on this, and I think, you know, frankly, too open, in my estimation. And you know, you could surmise, like, why a large, very wealthy incumbent would like maybe be okay being regulated. You know, we can afford. You know, Facebook. I'm still saying we. You know, Facebook can afford to hire 20,000 people to sort of review content. You know, you know, new startup can't.
Yes. So, a totally different question. So, you know, I found that when you're working with smart people and you're having those type of discussions, they become philosophical really quickly, because those people, smart people, honest people, get the idea of a principle. So did you get to talk about kind of principles that really govern what you guys are doing in Facebook, and maybe getting all the way to philosophy, you know?
Yes and no. I mean, we definitely got to principles. The more senior the person I was talking to, the more willing that they were to engage in the principles involved and to sort of have that high-level strategic conversation about it. And I saw that very consistently with the executives at Facebook. That conversation very quickly got to talking about principles. With, you know, lower-level employees, it was sort of more hit and miss. It never got to a really philosophical place. You know, I think. Talking about, for example, like the real principles behind the importance of free speech, for example, that was just like one step away from any conversation we were really having.
So let's talk about the future a little bit. So you just left.
Yeah.
Well, what are the plans moving forward?
Yeah. So I mean, what I want to do right now is actually take a lot of time to explore some problems that are really, I think, at the heart of all of this, and some other issues that I think are happening in the world. And so. What I'm interested in is sort of the intersection of epistemology, which is sort of the study of knowledge, how do we know what we know, and technology. And I'm interested in whether or not products and services, technology, can be used to help people think about acquiring objective knowledge. And so, you know,
super interesting.
We'll see if a company can be built around that, if products can actually help people with that. You know, I'm really excited, though, and I mentioned in the beginning, I'm really excited that I have the time and the space now to actually go explore that without sort of worrying about whether there's a business there for a little while.
Well, first, it's fascinating. I think, you know, the intersection of knowledge in anything is interesting, and how it can be applied. But you were talking more about how people can really apply the right type of epistemology in their lives, or something specific, education, or any other
I mean,
ideas?
I think it's, in particular, you know, I'm interested in a couple key fields. So you look at things like nutrition, psychology, relationships, health. Like, you know, these are areas where what you encounter year over year are just really new claims.
Right.
And what most people are sort of taught to do when they're seeking out new information about these claims is sort of just take the new claims. Like, you know, you just take
this
them
is true,
and you try that. And like, we don't really have any sense in these fields of what's objectively true and what actually works. And a lot of that has to do with like the knowledge systems that we have in dealing with those claims when we encounter them. And obviously, like, objectivist epistemology has a lot to say about like what it actually takes for knowledge to be objective, and what it means for you to integrate. How do you evaluate it? How do you integrate it and apply it? Those are incredibly powerful ideas that help you sort of make sense of the chaos of all the claims in these fields.
And you mentioned the fields that actually impact our lives in a direct way, right? Psychology, nutrition.
Those are fields that we all have to have answers to, and so
Right.
we're all constantly seeking out new claims about like what's gonna help me live the best life I can
This is
possibly
the reason why we
live.
see so much food and nutrition and self-help stuff on Facebook, I guess.
I mean, yeah, I think it is in a really very real way, because everybody's looking for objective knowledge here, but you've got to have the right framework about how to evaluate and apply knowledge. And my question is, can technology help teach that to some degree? And then for those who actually do have that framework already, can they make it easier to sort of use consistently, to integrate with other things that you already know, to keep track of what you know and don't know?
What we're doing is building a mobile app for objectivism. So maybe that's the intersection of epistemology and
Maybe
So, but well, first, thank you for taking the time, and I commend you for just making this high integrity move, as far as I'm concerned, of kind of sticking with your values, and I'm happy for you making this step. I think taking your own path is something that's always good. Doesn't matter if you succeed financially or not, but
I appreciate that. I mean, we said this earlier, but like objectivism is like, in a sense, why I came to Facebook, for it to be a platform those ideas get out on. It's why I had the courage and the conviction to stand up and sort of point out the issues that I thought were happening internally, and it's why I have the confidence to sort of go out on my own and try my own thing now.
yeah.
So
It's I think just not a lot of people understand the kind of the bridge or the connection between a philosophy or things that people think about as a body of work and your life. And I think what you're out to do is to build that bridge, which is, for me, super exciting. It's like, this is a body of work targeted towards a better life and a more fulfilled life, and that's great. So thanks a lot, Brian.
thank you.